Well, hey there, church. It's so good to be with you again. I'm excited because today we're starting a brand new series called Mindfield. And we've all been through a lot over the last couple of years. And maybe you've experienced this or you know somebody who has, where things that never used to bother you are suddenly bothering you. Maybe you're extraordinarily sad, or maybe you've experienced depression. Maybe you're angry. Maybe you just have this anxiety and fear, and you're just like, where has that come from? It's almost like you've stepped on a mine as you're walking through some type of minefield. So we're going to be talking about those things today. I think all of us really struggle from time to time with stuff, and we just want to have this honest dialogue about mental health and also our relationship with God. So I want you to know that Fellowship Church, we want to always strive to be a judgment-free zone where we can just be ourselves as we journey honestly together. And so our desire is really to point us all to the one who can calm our mind, right? Who can help us in this situation and who can refresh our souls. Hey, have you noticed these days how short-fused people are? I mean, there's all kinds of anger issues that are going around today, right? People are driving crazy on the roads. They're speeding more than they ever have before. There's all this road rage is up, and there's all this mismanaged anger. And that's what I want to talk to you about today. So some FBI statistics said this, that violent crime is committed every 24 seconds, that there's a murder every 23 minutes, and that domestic violence is the number one reason for emergency room visits for women. And throughout the pandemic, it's actually risen 7.5%. Matter of fact, if you'll notice that if you go to even restaurants nowadays, and I know a lot of them are short-staffed, and you'll see these signs that are literally written out, be kind to our staff. You know, don't blow up on us. Don't get angry with us. Be patient. And it's just a new world that we're living in. So I want to ask you this question. Who are you mad at, right? See, I think we need to talk about this because we all seem to be angry with somebody at some level. We don't always think of anger as a mental health issue, but I think in this day and age, it's probably a crisis more than it ever has been before, at least in my lifetime. And here's the thing. Uncontrolled anger, can hurt so many people, and it can really wreck our souls in the process. So I want to go to a passage of scripture that I go to a lot when we talk about anger and just self-control, and that's written in James chapter 1, verses 19 and 20. James writes, he's a pastor of a church, he's writing to his church, and they were under a lot of stress at the time as well. And he says this, understand this, my dear brothers and sisters. So he's talking to followers of Jesus. He says, you must all be quick to listen, and slow to speak, and slow to get angry. Man, we don't see that a lot. He goes on and he says this, human anger does not produce the righteousness that God desires. So today, we're talking about this unhealthy anger. And what makes this so difficult for us to talk about? It's that anger is really very complex because, first of all, we are wired by God to experience anger. God has given us these emotions. God gets angry at times, we've seen and we've read. And so we have this ability to get angry. It's kind of been given to us. But also, another thing about anger is that it sometimes even moves us to make the necessary changes in our lives, right? I mean, maybe some of us have come to the point in our lives where we're like, enough's enough. I'm ruining my health. I have to make some changes. And you just get angry about it, right? But it causes you to step forward and to make those changes. Some have dealt with addiction and just hit rock bottom and gotten angry and said, that's it. Some people have gotten angry about drunk driving and created this awareness of saying we can't do this anymore, or it's anger that started, to build these safe havens for victims of sex trafficking, saying this injustice cannot go on, right? And like I said, God grows angry at times. Jesus was angry, but remember when he flipped the tables in the temple? And I always like to say he flipped the tables, not the people, right? He didn't go after the people. But he was upset about the injustice in the temple and that people were being taken advantage of in that scenario, in that situation. And he said that needs to stop. And even just a few days before his crucifixion, he does this, and he's upset with what he sees. So it's normal to experience anger, but here's the important thing. It's also very important that it's expressed appropriately. You know, there's a way to be appropriately passionate. There's a way to be angry and not sin. Matter of fact, this reminds me of what Aristotle said thousands of years ago, the Greek philosopher. He said, anybody can become angry. That's easy. But to be angry with the right person and to the right degree and at the right time and for the right purpose and in the right way, that's not within everybody's power. That is not easy, right? Well, way too often, this is us, right? We can be so amped up so often, right? We can have these short fuses, which I think so many of us have during this crisis right now that we're going through. Well, I mean, we're just pushing each other's buttons. We're picking fights. We're holding on to grudges like never before. We're keeping score on social media, and we're just living this miserable existence, honestly, if you just step back and think about it. And it just feels like that so many of us are locked in a prison of this unresolved anger. Matter of fact, I want us to think about our spiritual health with this. What if we gauged our spiritual health by how quickly we can get worked up within ourselves, right? We could measure our irritability level on how fast that happens. So I have a question for you. How are you currently managing your anger? So let's walk through a few ways that we might be handling our anger these days. Some of us could probably be like what could be described as a trash can. Have you ever left your garbage full before you were going on vacation? You know, just left it outside by the curb or outside by the house. And it was a real hot day or a real hot week. And then at the end of vacation, you come back and you open it up and it just kind of it throws you back. And you're like, there's a science experiment in here. It's disgusting. Well, some people really stuff that anger down so much in their lives that you can just see it on them, right? And you could actually, as you're walking by, you can almost just smell it on them. You know, they're just always so amped up and wound up because they're trying to hold it all in, but they're not doing well with that. Maybe that's your way. But Paul writes in Ephesians, he says in Ephesians 4, don't sin by letting anger control you. Don't let the sun go down while you're still angry. Then he goes on and says, for anger gives this foothold for the devil. You know, somebody once said the difference between being mad and being bitter is sunset. It's just hanging on to this stuff, right? And when we do that, Paul writes, it gives Satan this opportunity to just waylay you, to surprise you, or to just harass you. So just like that garbage that stews in the trash can, anger can rot and poison your soul as well. So maybe you're not one who does this. Maybe you're like, man, I go the other way. I'm like a volcano, right? And that's the whole thing with people who are walking volcanoes. You never know when Mount St. whoever is going to erupt, right? I mean, this person is no fun to be around. They're like inconsistent and uncomfortable. You feel like you're walking on eggshells because you're like, I don't know what's going to set him off, and I don't know what's going to tick her off, and suddenly we're going to be on the receiving end of this. You know, and they start spewing and yelling and cussing and punching walls and kicking dogs and squealing tires, right? And they just get in your face. Well, the writer of Ecclesiastes, Solomon, his name is, he says this, control your temper, for anger labels you a fool. Oh, that's harsh. Matter of fact, I just want to just remind you, a little time out. I don't write these verses. I just read them. But man, that's a tough one to read, right? If small things are setting you off, you know, there might be a whole lot of reasons what's going on in your life that's doing that. But one of those that we have to be careful about could just be a measure of our character. And it might be time to really address this, right? The third way that we deal with anger could be that prosecuting attorney, right? Whenever some perceived injustice is done to them, these guys can never let it go. They're like a junkyard dog on this stuff. They dig up the cold cases, they badger the witness, and here's the thing, these guys are usually really smart and they have really great verbal skills, right? But the other person who they go after, it's just relentless, and they're made to feel like just this dirty, rotten human being. It's terrible. Well, Proverbs, it says this: avoiding a fight is actually a mark of honor. Only fools insist on quarreling. So don't be a prosecuting attorney. And then finally and I think a lot of us fall into this category, there's the stealth bomber, right? The stealth bomber is the passive aggressive person, that they're dealing with a lot of anger inside of them, but the way that they get rid of it or deal with it is they just take these shots at you. They're like the stealth bomber. They fly below the radar, then they drop these little bombs of sarcasm all around. And these bombs aren't just designed to really destroy us and wipe us out, but certainly to ding us a little bit, and certainly to send a message. And it just causes a flood of trouble in our lives. Look what the writer of Proverbs says: starting a quarrel is like opening a floodgate. So stop before a dispute breaks out. We just pick and pick and pick, and sarcastic comment after sarcastic comment. And it's relentless, and it just never seems to end. It just becomes this awful habit. So, how can God help us get a handle on our anger? Because that's really my angle of what I wanted to talk to you about today. So I got this outline from another pastor, Pastor Rick Warren. It's helped me in the past, and I think it can help you as well. He says some memorable statements that I think you could really take to heart. The first one is this: what if we would just reflect before we reacted, right? I know this is easier said than done, but it's interesting. Psychologists call anger the second emotion. As a matter of fact, they call it the smoke detector of emotions. You know how smoke detectors go off after something else somewhere else is going on, right? And what these psychologists say is that anger usually comes from something else. It comes from hurt, maybe fear, and certainly some frustration. I'm so angry, right? So we need to ask ourselves, where is this anger coming from? And one of the ways we ask ourselves this and reflect is by going to God about this, by just simply talking to him, much like David did in Psalm 139. Search me, O God. Know deep within my heart. Test me and know my anxious thoughts. Point out anything in me that offends you and lead me along the path of everlasting life. You know, we all have sore spots in our soul these days. And sometimes those scabs get picked. Sometimes those bruises in our soul get hit. And that's why it's important that we live with this level of awareness. It's really the difference between just our brain and how it just reacts and our mind. There's a lot of talk about this, where our mind is active, our mind is focused, our mind is involved in the decision-making process, right? Sometimes our brain just reacts, but we have to be mindful and thoughtful. So that's one of the things that we can do. Secondly is this: remember the results, right? In other words, play this forward a little bit. Think about, we've heard this before, like before you send that email or that text, before you click send, before you hit that button, consider, be thoughtful, consider this. Think about what you're going to, how this is going to be received. Consider before speaking up and blowing up a family dinner. You might just want to say something to somebody there, but just say, wait a minute, this could just really ruin this holiday, or could really ruin this moment. Consider, think about the consequences. We all don't have to respond like a trash can, volcano, prosecuting attorney, or stealth bomber, right? Play that video forward. Ask yourself, how is what I'm going to say and how I'm going to say it, how could this damage my relationships? So just pause and reflect. Count to 10, like some people have said. I got thinking about this. Aren't you so glad that God pauses? Aren't you so glad that he's patient? You can read about that in Exodus in the Old Testament, where, the children of Israel are doing some really crazy things, and God's just showing patience after patience. Him and Moses are talking this whole thing out. And I'm so glad that God is patient with me. I'm sure you're really glad that he's patient with you as well. So if you have this out of control anger, your next step today might be that you need to humble yourself a little bit. Quit making excuses about it. And maybe you should stop comparing yourself to others and say, well, at least I'm not like her or I'm not like him, right? Maybe just a little bit of humility these days and an apology. I think you'd be surprised at the graceful response that you'd get from somebody. So start to make some things right. Instead of holding things in, instead of spewing things out, instead of going after people, instead of all the sarcasm, make things right. Bring the situation into the light. Some of us might need to see a counselor who can really give us some tools, who can really help us. Others of us here at Fellowship may be joining a Celebrate Recovery group and saying, man, my anger's out of control. I can't live like this anymore. It's important for my family and my friends that I make a change in my life, and just for me and my walk with God. So in the moment when you feel that blood pressure rising, man, that's the time to invite God in, to ask God for his wisdom, for his help, for his self-control that he offers us, for his compassion and patience, to look for better options, to look to honor him and to build our character and certainly to heal our relationships. Well, there's a third response as well, and that's to restrain your remarks. And it's kind of dovetails off of what we just talked about. But think about this. When's the last time your ears got you into trouble, right? Probably not often. But your mouth, it always gets us in trouble, doesn't it? James again writes about this. He goes, people can tame all kinds of animals, birds, reptiles, and fish. You ever see that? Or people are sticking their heads in the mouths of lions and they're doing all that stuff, and alligators and everything. They're wrestling them. They're not even afraid of them. I mean, it's just wild to watch these things on YouTube. But then he goes on, he says, we can tame all those things, but nobody can tame the tongue. It's restless and it's evil. It's full of deadly poison. I mean, sounds hopeless. But that's why we need God's help. God replaces our junk deep within our heart with things like peace and gentleness, goodness and self-control. I mean, it really just recalibrates our heart. And man, that's something to celebrate when God makes a change in your life like that. And this is really the power of living in the presence of God. What do I mean by that? What I mean by that is that living in such a way that you're allowing God to renew your mind every day, to think the way Jesus thinks, to respond like he would respond, to see people in situations like he would. So next time that referee blows that call at your kid's game, or things don't go well at work or school, I want you to remember Proverbs 15:1. It says, a gentle answer deflects anger, but harsh words make tempers flare. So I don't know what your next step might be. Maybe it is to get on the phone and make an appointment with a counselor. Maybe it is to enroll in one of our recovery groups that meets on Friday night, or to work through a book. And a good anger book is Dr. Les Carter's Anger Workbook. Or maybe to take a break from some of the habits that you've instilled in your life. Maybe you need to take a break from social media and cable news for a little while, and to feed your mind with other things that are good and things that are true, and to allow God to be your Prince of Peace. I just ran across this stat the other day. The average person spends 2.5 hours a day on social media and only 30 minutes a week in God's Word. I mean, what if you just turned those? What would your life look like if you reversed the time spent? Even just a little bit. See, Jesus, this is interesting because he knows and he's experienced everything we have. And even his followers, this 12 disciples, he had a couple of these guys who were really angry guys who followed him. And they had expectations of just destroying things to set them right. Matter of fact, their names were James and John. They were very close to Jesus. And he even nicknamed them the Sons of Thunder. I mean, these guys were just raging. They were angry. And Jesus and his disciples, matter of fact, in one situation, they were traveling through Samaria on their way to Jerusalem. When they ran into this trouble, Jesus tried to find some accommodations for the night in one place, but it was met by this opposition from the villagers simply because, oh, you're going to Jerusalem? No, we're not going to help you. You're Jewish? We're not going to help you. And it was just a result of this Jew and Samaritan prejudice that was going on in that day. So when the disciples, James and John, saw this, it gets written about, they asked, Lord, do you want us to call fire down from heaven to destroy them? I mean, these guys are just like, let's just go nuclear on these guys. And then Jesus had to say, hey, there's a better way than this. And then think about Jesus in the garden even. We've been reflecting on that this past weekend. And here he is in the garden, and he's becoming the King of Kings and Lord of Lords, ultimately through his death, burial, resurrection. But it's not going to be by anger. It's not going to be by threat or violence. Matter of fact, Peter tried to cut somebody's ear off, or did it by accident, trying to hurt him, and Jesus healed him. He wanted to become king by giving his life for many. I mean, he even taught in one of his most famous messages, blessed are the peacemakers, because they'll be called the children of God. Here's the good news. Jesus wants to rid you of unhealthy anger. He really does. He wants you to be a person who's quick to listen and very slow to speak, and certainly someone who's slow to get angry, to have your anger under control. He wants you to be a person who picks up your cross rather than trying to put somebody else on one. So maybe your prayer today would be simply this: God, help me to remember Jesus. Help me to make Jesus the example that I want to follow. God, give me wisdom, give me patience, and instill within me a more peaceful heart. Amen.